The Trailing Arbutus. Chapter 1. A family of mice was plodding on a wooden railing in a colonial home in Massachusetts. They eyed the feast in the dining room. Scent from the turkey, squash, green bean casserole, and bowls of stuffing and sauce made the mouths water of the people who had decided to wait outside and peer in the windows with sheep who bleated. Bah! 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 The neck of a swan ducked, then craned into a bowl of salad and began to pluck at the greens. The rabbits at the table climbed on top of the table and nibbled at the carrot casserole, dirtying the tablecloth. The 7 animals wore humans' clothes. The swan had a necktie, the gopher wore a hat, the rabbits had on sweaters. The family who lived in the house had grown tired with their civilized lives. Last June, they had decided to switch places with the animals who lived in their backyard. The new house guests were put in charge of a maid, chef, and butler. The butler was a bloody fool. The family living on the house's yard had inherited an estate after their parents passed away, could not decide on what to do with any of the belongings or divide the real estate so they could each stay in the house. So they reverted to acting like the children they had been in the house long ago. They had a ceremony in the foyer, went outside, lured in all of the animals, and now the animals were stuck in the house. Madame Marjorie, the old maid, said before she left that this was an apology for all of the pollution to the ocean and air. The help had been briefed about what to do, so they calmed the animals down quickly enough with all of the food, and now, months later, the yard animals were pampered and adjusted to life indoors somewhat. Animals ate 2 large meals a day, each had their own room, and they could watch as much television as they wanted, but the animals were not allowed to go outside anymore, as they had to learn to stay indoors and eat with silverware. They were asked to do that, but it was obviously too difficult and random a task, though the butler was stubborn. The humans were now in the grass, chewing the grass. They were floating on the pond, farting. There was a raccoon who began to tear up the turkey meat. The fox tore a leg from the turkey and chewed his turkey leg in the corner. The fox wore a brassiere. He would have eaten the swan had the food not come out soon. Every day, the fox was more and more enticed to eat one of the other animals. There was shit everywhere. The dining room had 80s wallpaper, blue and green stripes with baskets of flowers. The tables, chairs had high backs. They were sturdy, but for the first several weeks the house guests tilted them over and fell off the chairs. The butler would have to come into the dining room and help the animals back onto the chairs. When the animals were first put into the house, the butler and company had to shut the windows and lock doors, not letting the animals outside to escape, fighting them off with brooms. Over time, the animals were calmed by food. They warmed up to living indoors because the chef was a skilled chef. The mice watched the lunch on the balustrade patiently. "This will not be a challenge," said a mouse with Gouda. "They are getting food everywhere," said a baby mouse who had never seen a feast. "Look." The mouse squeaked, then pointed in surprise. "Look, just now a corn kernel has flown over my ear." "I dare not approach the fox," said the father. "Nor the horse in the living room. The television room, I mean. They are too strong and hungry, but maybe the cat would help us out now. He remembers what it was like before. It's been 7 months. You think the people are ever coming inside?" They like it out there. All of the animals were not getting along, but they agreed not to let the mice have lunch, dinner, or breakfast with them. The balustrade glistened with the varnish applied 4 years hence, or prior. "Have you ever read The Rats of Nim?" asked the boy who was forgotten in the house when his family went out to live in the backyard. When Mambles retired to their rooms or stampeded to the warm blankets of the family room, mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce galore was left on the floor in splotches and chunks. Mice scurried to find kernels of corn and scraps of turkey. The mice did not mind having the animals in the house, as it made their lives easier, while the maids and cooks were waiting every day for the joke to end. The men and women who owned the house would not talk to the maid when she went outside to bring them plates of food. The human family would neigh like the horses and hiss like snakes under the sky. They had sworn off reason and disassembled progress. The horse liked to lay on blankets in the living room. He moved less and less. The swan got so fat it could no longer pester the mice, who liked to nibble table scraps. Every night, the butler resented his responsibility to pick up the horse's stinky dung. The responsibilities of the world had gotten to be too much for the three left inside to serve the social experiment. The gopher smoked a cigar at a table by a lamp. "We must get them out of here," said the chef, speaking up at last. "These spoiled adults are now so unspoiled. Have you seen them outside? They have begun to sleep in a ditch under the shed," said the maid. "Yes, I suppose they are cold," said the chef. "Their blankets are rags." "They are letting these animals ruin the finish. It stinks to high heaven. We go through triple the amount of food. I'm going to church. I must get out of here. This is nothing but a pigsty, where it used to be our home." The argument, as I understand it, is that they would have ruined the house too, so at least now it is getting used for something interesting. "I think it's a riot," said the little boy, laughing. "What about us? I was not brought up to cater to beasts." Chapter 2. "Sirs," said the raccoon, open-handed, "I have made a call to a roofer. My dearest, the swan, would like it if her cousins could live with us in the house. I understand we have been denied access to doors or windows, so I'm having the roofer come tear an enormous hole in the roof. We won't leave, don't worry. But do prepare beds for at least 10 swans. The fox and I will wait up in the attic. If any unwanted birds aim for our landing pad, we will fend them off with brooms." The mice on the balustrade had returned there with full stomachs. They overheard the raccoon's plot to welcome more swans. They were perturbed. By night, the colonial house appeared pristine to a passerby who was down the lane on a stroll. He sought the trailing arbutus by the stone wall and spring grass. He sat by the small white flowers for a quarter hour. The butler dressed the next day in a padded suit, unsure if he were going to call the police or dutifully fight off the swans that would now be going into the house through the roof. But first he was chased inside by a red-faced man who was barking and running on all fours. "Horrifying," he said, catching his breath in the foyer. Meanwhile, in the living room, the horse had wished to have the TV shut off, and the gopher agreed to shut it off for him. They had been up all night after being let into the liquor cabinet. The horse was hiccuping. "But," he said, "what people forget in their urgent struggle for the end, is that you cannot have a happy ending without a sad beginning." "Adieu," said the gopher. "Arrivederci," mouthed the portrait of an Italian saint. "And what's more, in regard to the humans crawling around on the grass outdoors, I heard them blame distant smoky towers for the ruining of our lands. But what about my old jockeys? It's not about blame." "Elfin," added the gopher. "We are earth itself. They've stopped thinking forward for the lives of the innocent." The swan waddled into the room. "Are you two really partaking in poison drinking?" The drunkards were surprised by the swan's purity in comparison to their depravity. If only sober humans acted on the horse's passionate concern. "Well, hello, madam. I hear your family arrives today." "Don't try to disarm me with flattery, Gopher. You know, you might sound good to yourselves in this state, but it's Raccoon and Fox who are up there with the roofer just this minute." "Roofer?" asked the drunk horse. "Raccoon and Fox are overseeing the welcome of my cousins. When they opened the door for the roofer, he did not even notice they were animals and kept looking around at all the ruin." "You mean to tell me those two dressed in trench coats and headscarves today, wearing sunblockers, was Fox and Raccoon? My, I thought it was a sweet old wife and husband visiting me from a dream I had while Horse was ranting last night in pig Latin." "Yes, the disguise was good, isn't it? They are seeing if they can work with the roofer without him suspecting they are woodland critters, aren't they, Swan?" "Well, aren't we civilizing? Technically, we are keeping sheep." "Bah! Bah! Bah!" "The end is nigh," the horse said, and he must have been joking, for he could not define what exactly would be ending. Chapter 3. Why? "No reason. Same reason you two are doing this." "Bah! Bah! Bah!" The sheep continued bleating in the yard. "Experiment," said the horse, who was sobering up as the sunlight entered through the window. "I like the living room best. It's the warmest place, and you know, this has worked out quite well for me. I was getting tired of my legs all the time in the stable. I think I'll just kneel here and go to sleep forever after." In the attic, the roofer was following directions, despite his professional advice. He bludgeoned the support beams with an iron rod and sawed the wooden beams that supported an area of the roof. Then the roofer spent hours clearing a hole in the roof big enough for drone deliveries, as the raccoon explained he needed drone access, lying for no reason, just because he got away with a disguise. The roofer left the house. He drove away in his van, an odd job complete. Then, in the blue sky, appeared wings flapping, squawks, and swans so big the raccoon almost fled down the stairs. While the swans arrived as planned, no one expected the geese that followed. The human family watched from the yard that night as their attic was bombarded by bats and sparrows. Daddy Longlegs crawled down tree bark, through blades of grass, up the side of the house, and infested the attic, making their way slowly to the kitchen sink. 2 days later, the help all quit, no longer hoping to regain dignity. Blue footprints were left on a calendar covered in red X's by the mice who were tracking time. Without a chef, the indoor animals began to fight tooth and claw, and the house itself became overrun with hostility, while the banisters and floor were smeared with earwax and boogers by the little rascal who was not taught purpose, so only enjoyed the animals without taking care of his house. Months later, the house was abandoned, windows broken, doors off the hinges, the floors smeared with poo-poo, the horse's body decomposing in the living room. 2 years later, a gang of teenagers had a party in what remained of the house. They accidentally started a fire, and what remained burnt to the ground. The family who had given up the house had chosen to return to provincial society after their strange outdoor experiment. They returned together to stand around the foundations of the house and said goodbye. The fox waited by the forest. The swan watched from the lake. The ruins were eaten entirely by termites. Grass grew in that spot 100 years later. No man nor beast lived on that site until 500 years later, but many little feet passed through the grass unfazed. Something of substance was done, but none understood except for the silver fox.